Hello, my dear adult children of alcoholics. In this video, I'm going to talk about the common roles that are played by children who are raised in families where alcohol and drugs were abused. Those four roles are the hero role, the mascot role, the lost child, and the scapegoat. Now, before I dive in further into talking about these roles, I do want to talk a little bit about the history and the implications of some of the studies that were conducted. So these roles are theorized. They're mostly based on theories of Adlerian theories and later popularized in literature of the 80s and 90s about the adult children of alcoholics. These roles were theorized by clinicians, psychologists and therapists that worked with adult children of alcoholics and have found these roles to be common within the practice. Now, in recent years, there were some studies that were conducted to see if these roles, if the theories about these roles do in fact play out when conducting empirical psychological research. And it was found that although there were a ton of differences found between adult children of alcoholics and adults that did not come from alcoholic families, the roles didn't necessarily reflect just adult children of alcoholics. These same roles were found in normal families and as well as dysfunctional families in general, not particularly alcoholic families. Now, these experiments were conducted on college students as well as the inmate prison population, and so that's a very particular subset of the population. And so in clinical practice, some of these roles are still used today, and the reason that I want to explore them is I do find them to be very useful in order to conceptualize what kind of defenses maybe you built up as a child and the kind of defenses that you might still be using today. So it's just some food for thought. Please don't feel like you need to fit into one of these categories. If it doesn't apply to you and you're an adult child of an alcoholic, that's fine. If you're not an adult child of an alcoholic and you're recognizing yourself in some of these roles, a lot of people do. So these are just conceptual roles that you can use as a framework, just some food for thought. See if it applies to you, see if you can relate to those roles. All right, so the four roles that are typically assigned to children that grow up in dysfunctional families, alcoholic families, are number one, it's the hero role, the scapegoat role, the lost child role, and the mascot role. So the hero role, see, this happens a lot in alcoholic families because the alcoholics can be extremely, extremely critical. And nothing is ever good enough for them. They're critical of themselves and they're critical of other people. So when a child grows up in an alcoholic family, some standards are set extremely high. And in order to survive, these children build a defense mechanism of, I'm going to be as perfect as possible. I'm going to do what my parents want me to do. I'm going to try to prove to them that I'm worthy, and also I want as little conflict as possible. So the hero is a child that gets good grades in school, is kind of a perfectionistic tendencies, wants to get everything just right because they're so afraid to be criticized all the time that it's like they're walking on eggshells. And so these are frequently the people that become extremely successful. Now, where is the harm in that? Now, the harm in that is that sometimes these children grow up to be successful, but they take on careers and they make choices that are not actually true for them. So they do what's best for the family, or they try to somehow prove the family, and they also want to prove to the world that their family is not that bad. So they end up achieving and overachieving for others, either for the world in order to justify the family's existence, or for the parents that are highly critical of them, or for some even extended family members too that might be very critical of the family. So they carry this huge burden on their shoulders where they feel like they have to succeed and they have to make all these major accomplishments. But the reason why it hurts is because those accomplishments are not necessarily for them. So they might pick careers that are not compatible, not authentic with their own being, but careers that make them successful. And because they're frequently disconnected from their own wants and desires, they get this feeling of being a fraud. They have this feeling like they somehow fooled the system, and this is how they were able to gain some level of success in life. And so they live life kind of suffering from guilt and shame, and feeling that they have somehow fooled the system. And what that gets them as a child is it gets them positive attention from their parents, and it also gets them positive attention from the world. So they keep building this persona that might not be authentic to themselves. So that is the hero archetype of the family. The second archetype is the scapegoat archetype. And the scapegoat archetype, the way that is formed is the parents blame, they focus on the child in order to not see what is happening within their own family. Because one of the markers of alcoholism is what? It's denial, right? And so in order for the family to continue denying the problem with alcoholism and all the comorbid problems that usually come with alcoholism, which is other mental health issues, financial problems, legal problems, marital problems, and health problems. And so instead of focusing on those problems, focusing on themselves and focusing on the parents and each other, for example, they are focusing on this poor scapegoat child. And it's always like, oh, this, you did this again and you did that again. And they go to their friends sometimes and complain about the scapegoat child. And that is done for the purpose of of continually denying their own problems and pointing the finger at somebody else. And so the scapegoat children have actually been studied quite a lot. I think the most studied probably out of all archetypes, because obviously it seems that would be a very dangerous role to play for a child that is constantly blamed. What happens? They begin to believe that they really are the problem. And as a child, they take on that problem for themselves. And it becomes kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. It kind of feels good for them to have the attention, and that is also the kind of attention that they're used to as children, being scapegoated. Because even negative attention in a situation like this is still attention, and this is the kind of attention that scapegoat children tend to look for. And so what happens later on in life is they have really difficulty identifying when people are not being very kind to them, people are not being very good to them. They usually think that things are their fault because they're used to taking on that fault for themselves as a scapegoat. Somewhere subconsciously they feel that they need to take on this role in order to deny the problem, and so they end up playing this role later in life. And this comes in forms of self-sabotage. This comes in forms of getting yourself in abusive relationships, not being able to identify when people are not looking out for your best interest, when there is some form of malicious acts against the scapegoat child, very poor boundaries. And yes, there's a lot of research studies done on scapegoat children, particularly with inmate populations, because the question was, well, is it true that the children that played those roles end up, spending time in jail and getting themselves into very serious troubles, delinquencies, and things like that? And it was actually found that there is not much of a difference. There's really not much of a difference of the kind of role that was played within the family. So it's not that children that are scapegoats are necessarily, doomed to be in some form of never-ending trouble. But it's more, out of these roles, it's more likely, unfortunately, that it seems that this is the role that actually does fall into delinquencies, falls into trouble more than other roles. And so that is the scapegoat child. The great thing about scapegoat children is that they also learn how to play against the rules, and there's some really interesting kind of creativity that can be born out of that. But it's also just another defense. Then the third defense, the lost child. These are the children that cope with the situation in childhood by going into their own fantasy world, and it's very clear to see how that would happen. The reality is not very pleasant, and so they build up fantasy world. They build up worlds in which they feel comfortable, and so this develops a very high level of creativity, and it can be some really amazing things that come out from this lost child role. The dangerous thing here is that there's a lot of sort of derealization, depersonalization, not quite being in touch with the reality. And that defense can be carried throughout life, and can cause the person to also face a lot of denial about their situation at hand, such as relationships, building fantasy worlds about what is happening in their life and spending a lot of time in those worlds, not being able to be in the moment, not being able to be present in the moment when situations in their lives are unfolding. And so that is the lost child role. The fourth role is the mascot, and the mascot role is all about getting positive attention. So these are the children that joke around a lot. They have a great artistic skill, and it's like no matter what happens in the family, they're always making a joke out of it. They're making a skit. They're making an act. And this is similar to sort of the scapegoat, but reversed, where the parents continue to be in denial of the problem and they pay positive attention to the child. It's like a little entertainer. And no matter what happens, it's like a little sunshine. It's somebody that is always going to bring some positivity into the family. And so these children develop really great talents, for acting, great comedic skills. They can be really fun to be around. Now the problem is that they too were avoiding reality so much by putting on these acts that frequently when they grow up, they don't understand, why people have serious conversations, and they have difficulty sometimes being a part of the social group because they're always clowning around, causing disruptions. They don't understand what's the point of being serious. They don't feel like they quite fit in. So it's like they can be very humorous and really fun, but people sense that there's something not genuine around them. There can be a sense of mistrust that's formed around the mascot child, and they end up keeping people at this perpetual distance, that even though they're fun, there's just that it's a defense against what is really happening. And so there's always that feeling between you and I, that there is some form of a separation that is being masked by some humor, that is being masked by an act, by some form of entertainment. And so that's the mascot child. And so once again, these 4 roles are, pretty cool frameworks for a lot of adult children of alcoholics. When they hear about these roles, they can really relate, like, oh my God, yeah, I totally fit into that role. And that triggers some memories, and that triggers some awareness on how some defenses that are being deployed now, like that feeling of not being normal, that feeling of not being quite authentic, that feeling of not living your own authentic life, that can be sometimes in the back of the minds of adult children of alcoholics. So once they learn about these roles, they have these kind of like aha moments. Oh yes, that is how I fit into that role. That is what my parents made of me. This is the responsibility that I took on myself, that I'm still carrying today, and that is making me feel the way that I feel. So I hope you found this video useful. Comment below. Let me know why or why not. Do you agree? Do you fit into any of these roles? Is it useful to learn about these roles? And always be kind and compassionate to yourself. I'm wishing you well. Until the next video.